व्रणितोपासनीयम् व्याख्यास्यामः यथोवाच भगवान् धन्वन्तरिः। व्रणितस्य प्रथममेव आगारम् अन्विच्छेत् तच्च आगारं प्रशस्तवास्त्वादिकं कार्यं प्रशस्तवास्तुनिगृहे शुचौ आतपवर्जिते निवातेन च रोगाः स्युः शारीर आगन्तुमानसाः तस्मिन् शयनसम्भ्रातं स्वास्तीर्णं मनोज्ञं प्राक्षिरस्कं सशस्त्रं कुर्वीत। Now, in case post-operative conditions after the surgery, the patient has to be taken to a post-operative care room where the wound care has to be taken. A specialized room was being used for care of patients in those days too, and that room would have prashasta vastu. Now, vastu word is often misunderstood with lots of these confusions about what is vastu. Basic meaning of vastu is vasanti pranino yatra vasanimase, a area where there is a convenience of living. So it's not that vastu has something occult practices or so on. Vastu is simply a place where you have all the conveniences of the living, conveniences as per the requirement. So in case of a wound care, you need to have those conveniences and a room has to be prepared for that, and there's the Vranita Agara. So Vranita Agara or post-operative care room was practiced. Now, conveniences which were used in Sushruta's period and the conveniences we use in a post-operative care may be slightly different because of the needs as such. In the present day situation, we take care of the ventilation. The most important thing is the ventilation, hygiene of the area, and then of course the necessary resuscitation apparatuses which are required there, and then wound care materials, dressing material and so on, which need to be there. Now, and then the bed. Sushruta also describes about the bed where the patient has to be nursed, which should be proper and convenient to the patient and comfortable to the patient. And in those days, Sushruta preferred to make the patient lie down with the head towards the east. Now, being head towards the east, again, it's not simply occult issue. In those days, when there were no question of artificial lighting and the ventilation also, no artificial ventilation, lying towards the head with the head towards the east would give you sufficient light and ventilation. Sashastram kurvita. Now, in a patient who is in the post-operative room, had to have some weapons, protective weapons with him. Now, again, this also is from the point of view of those days where you didn't have very sophisticated building as such, and there is a possibility of some wild animals coming in. So to protect that, there should be some protection in those areas. Now you have a security in the front of the hospital gate, and hence you need not have a weapon at the bedside of the patient. So that's the difference. Now you keep the security outside the room. In those days, that security was kept very close to the patient. That's all the difference. Sukhachesta prakarasya swastirne shaine vrani pratyam dishi sthita devaha tatpujartham tatshiraha. Now, because of the comfort given over the bed, patient would be more convenient, and there is a version like because our worshipping gods would be towards the east and prefer to be kept in the east, you have to keep the head towards the east. I think more than that kind of an occult notion, it's about the practical convenience of hygiene and lighting. Tasmin surubbihi anukulaihi priyamuraihi upasyamaanah ythestam asita suhृदः विक्षिपन्त्याशु कथाभिर्व्रणवेदनाः आश्वासयन्तु बहुशः स्वानुकूलाः प्रियमुदाः. In the post-operative room, the patient's friends or the well-wishers of the patient, they are allowed in, and they need to keep the patient engaged so that the patient would have more willpower to face the pain, or he will have a better psychological situation to face the pain of the post-operative period. Now, in the post-operative room, to allow the relatives of the patients in or not, it's a controversy. Now, we do not allow the people to enter into the post-operative room from the point of view of avoiding the infections. Now, another important is that nacha diva nidra vashaka syat diva swapna vrane kanduhu gatranam gauravam tadha shvethu vedana raga sravashteva bhrisham bhavet. The patient should not sleep during the daytime, because sleep during the daytime would produce itching and then the heaviness, swelling in the area, possibility of sepsis is more. Now, this is a very important issue. Till very recently, in the contemporary science, that sleep cycle and sleep deprivation having effect on the wound healing was not known. But at present, there are lots of these research articles presented over the issue, and the hypothesis is a sleep deprivation or a alteration of the sleep cycle would affect the innate immunity as well as adaptive immunity, and hence it can produce a affect the wound healing. If at all those who are interested, the direct relationship of the wound healing and the sleep, you have many of the articles published now. I have selected a few of the reference articles. Those who are interested can go through these reference articles where the direct relationship between the wound healing and the sleep pattern, and particularly daytime sleep also, and alteration of the sleep cycle are studied, well studied and documented. उत्थान संवेशन परिवर्तन चक्रमण उच्चैः भाषणाद्यासु आत्मचेष्टासु अप्रमत्त व्रणं संरक्षेत स्थानासनं चक्रमणं दिवास्वप्नं तथैव च व्रणितो न निषेवेत शक्तिमानपि मानवः. Once the patient has a wound, during the wound care, in the healing phase of the wound, unnecessary movement should be avoided, and throughout the wound has to be protected. A physical protection of the wound is one of the important issues. उत्थानाद्यासनं स्थानं शय्या च अतिनिषेवित प्राप्नुयात् मार्ताद् अङ्गविजः तस्माद् विवर्जयेत् गम्यानां च स्त्रीणां सन्दर्शन सम्भाषण संस्पर्शनानि दूरत एव परिहरेत् स्त्रीदर्शनादिभिः शुक्रं कदाचित् चरितं श्रवेत् ग्राम्यधर्मकृतान् दोषान् सो असंसर्गे अपि अवाप्नुयात्. Then of course it's not only the physical movements, too much of sleep also has to be avoided. Even the sexual indulgence or simple sexual stimulation also has to be avoided. Now, because simply the sexual stimulation occurs, there could be ejaculation, and that ejaculation itself would consume a huge amount of energy, and hence it should be avoided. So this is sort of a stress given as such. Then it's about the diet. नवधान्यम आश तिल कराय कुलत्थ निष्पाव हरितक शाक अम्ल लवण कटुक गुड़ पिष्ट विकृति वल्लूर शुष्क शाक आजाबिक आनूप औदक मांस वस शीतोदक कृशर पायस दधि दुग्ध गद्ध प्रभृतीनि परिहरेत. तक्रान्तः नवधान्यादिः योऽयं वर्ग उदाहृतः दोष संजननो शेष विज्ञेय पूयवर्धनः. Now the पूयवर्धन गण as such is a unique contribution of Sushruta. In no other Samhita you have this Puya Vardhana Gada, a group of substances which can increase the Puya or possibility of the sepsis as a food material. This is a very important issue, and the substances which are used are starting from Navadhanya. Navadhanya is a recently ripened cereals, food substances. Now, ideally, all the grains are supposed to be stored for a year and then it has to be used. Now, whereas now the current dietitians would prefer a fresh one. The difference is the content of protein content of the cereals would be reduced after a year or so. Now, that reduced protein content would be having a better assimilation property, whereas nourishment value of a new grain would be somewhat more than what the older stored one. So this is an issue of controversy. Current dietetics would prefer a new grain, fresh grain, whereas our older concept would prefer a stored grain. The differences again need to be studied well, but from practical point of view, though there are no such objective study, from the practical point of view, anyone can observe that there would be a better digestion with a older stored grain. Then is Takranta. Another important issue is Takra is considered as Puya Vardhana in Sushruta, whereas Takra is considered as one of the Agni Vardhana Dravya, and it's supposed to stimulate the Agni in the body, and this again a specific concept of Sushruta, that administration of Takra during the wound healing has to be avoided. Whereas in no other Samhitas, this concept is not mentioned as such. So again, bit of controversial issue. Anyway, practically, again, this need to be studied better. Some more study needs to be done before we give any conclusive, authentic statement on this issue. Then Madhyaprastha Maireya Arishtasava Sidu Suravikaraन् Pariharet Madhyamam Tatha Ruksham Tishnam Ustam Javiryatah Ashikari Tatpitam Kshipram Vyapariyet Vranam. Madhyapa or alcoholic preparations are to be avoided during the wound care, and if a person is already addicted to the alcohol, and avoiding the alcohol would produce more trouble. In such conditions, instead of giving stronger or more concentrated this madhya, you may give a weaker, a relatively diluted madhya. Now, again, nutrition and wound healing is another very popularly discussed subject in the contemporary science. Lots of discussion about the nutrition, requirement of the nutrition, and the diet. There are lots of articles presented, lots of study is going on, but ultimately it's about only about the protein fat content of the in general more protein, lesser fat, and lesser carbohydrate. This is the pattern of the diet suggested in the present situation now. And again, those who are interested in more detailed study about these issues, you may refer to these articles as such, references articles. वात आतप रजो धूम अवश्याय अतिसेवन अतिभोजन अनिष्ट भोजन श्रवण दर्शन ईर्ष्या अमर्ष भय शोक ध्यान रात्रि जागरण विषमाशन अशन शयन उपवास वाग व्यायाम स्थान चंक्रमण शीत वात विरुद्ध अध्यशन जीर्ण मक्षिकाद्याः बाधाः परिहरेत. Now all these are the stress inducing factors. Stress inducing factors could be of the environment, environmental stress inducing factor like a breeze or a sunlight or maybe the dust or smoke, etc. Or then the stress inducing factors related to the food, anishta bhojana or viruddhashana, vishamashana, where food substances which are not really liked by the person, or those food substances can produce cross reactions, they should be avoided. Or the stress of psychological origin like irsha, amarsha, bhaya, shoka, etc., emotional disturbances, they can produce impairment of the wound healing. Or contamination of the wound by makshikadyaha, the insects also should be avoided. वर्णीयः संप्रतप्तस्य कारणे एवमादिभिः क्षीणशोणितमांसस्य भुक्तं सम्यक् न जीर्यति अजीर्णात् पवनादीनां विभ्रमो बलवान् भवेत् ततः शोकरुजास्रावदाः पाकान् अवाप्नुयात्. The theory behind is because of the stress, the agni would be affected, and once the agni is affected, the digestion would be affected, which may affect the healing. That's the theory. Stress of different sorts and the wound healing is another very popular subject, which again is studied in detail and lots of research articles are being published. I have given you some selected research articles which give a wider base or wider information about this issue. So those who are interested, they may refer to these articles even. सदा नीचन खरोम्ना शुचिना शुक्लवाससा शांति मंगल देवता ब्राह्मण गुरुपरेण भवितव्यमिति तत्कस्य हेतोः हिंसा विहाराणि हि महावीर्याणि रक्षांसि पशुपति कुबेर कुमार अनुचराणि मांस शोणित प्रियत्वात् क्षतज निमित्तं रडिनम् उपसर्पन्ति सत्कारार्थं जिघांसूनि वा कदाचित्. Now there is a possibility of infection, and those infecting organisms are considered as the bhutas or rakshasas. The word rakshasa in our general vernacular meaning, rakshasa means demons, but these are not really demons. Rakshasas are those which are not visible to the naked eye, and they tend to have a preference to the darkness and move in the night, and they prefer the flesh as their food. So these are really the microorganisms. Now microorganisms are present in the environment, and to avoid the contamination, you need to keep the hygiene, maintain the hygiene. Nichana kharomna. The nails should be trimmed properly. You have to keep clean, and a clean dress has to be used, and the environment should be auspicious. You have to maintain a proper environment. Shanti, Mangala, Devata, Brahmana, Guru, Parayana doesn't mean you have to worship. It's about keeping the environment auspicious. And from the, again, microbiology of Ayurveda is another very important subject, very major issue, where you can have lots of discussion. I think we will not go into that detail now. But one of the important issue is the organisms would have two categories, Sakarartham, Jighamsuniva. Some of the organisms may expect a respect from the person, some may have an intention to hurt. Now, if you go into the microbiology now, organisms are categorized into two categories, commensals and pathogens. Commensals are those organisms that are present in the body and where they live with the give and take relationship, and they are not harmful and they are necessary in the body. Whereas pathogens are those which produce the disease. And these organisms, commensals, may become opportunistic. They may change over to a pathogen due to the changes in the environmental condition. This is a very basic theme of microbiology in the contemporary science. Now, this idea, original idea, is of Ayurveda, where the concept of a organism which is present in the body and which is helpful to the body, and it expects some mutual giving, satkara, or jighamsan, those which tend to harm. They are the two categories and they have to avoid it. Now, तेषां सत्कारकामानां प्रयतेत अन्तरात्मा धूप बलि उपहारांश्च भक्षांश्चैव उपहारयेत. The satkarakamartham, or the commensal bacteria, can be prevented from being an opportunistic by giving them an alternative source of nourishment. Dhupa bali upahara is giving a source of nourishment. Now, this is absolutely true. Commensal bacteria, they are living in the human body because of the nourishment. If they get their nourishment, they would not harm the tissues. When they are deprived of their nourishment, they become opportunistic. Now, this happens when you administer antibiotics irrationally. Commensal bacteria, when there is a pathogenic infection, you may administer an antibiotic. That antibiotic may harm the pathogenic organism. At the same time, it also can spoil the environment of these the commensal bacteria, and because of that, the commensal bacteria now becomes pathogenic. It becomes an opportunistic and becomes pathogenic, and this is one of the major issues related to the complications of the antibiotic therapy. Whereas the idea of keeping them in a healthy condition and avoiding the harm is the dhupa, bali, upahara, etc. So that's the basic issue. ते संतर्पिताः आत्मवन्तं न हिंस्युः तस्मात् सततम् अतन्दितो जनपरिवृतो नित्यं दीप उदक शस्त्र स्रक दाम पुष्प लाजादि अलङ्कृते वेश्मनि संपत् मंगल मनोनुकूलाः कथाः शृण्वन् आसीत् संपदादि अनुकूलाभिः कथाभिः प्रीतमानसः आशावान् व्याधिमोक्षाय क्षिप्रं सुखमवाप्नुयात्. So you need to avoid the possibility of sepsis by keeping the commensals as commensals and avoiding them to become an opportunistic pathogenist. And at the same time, you also have to keep up the morale of the patient by keeping the environment properly, and the environment, the area could be maintained that Pranitagara, the post-operative room, has to be decorated. You have to have something which will help the psyche of the patient, and it could be like the Anukulaha Katha. It could be talk about the helpful stories, TV viewing, or maybe the environment, friends who can talk to him, and so on. So important is the psychological strength. The morale of the patient has to be kept up, and that will help in healing. ऋग्वेद साम अथर्व वेदाभिहितैः अपरेश्च आशीर्विधानैः उपाध्यायः विषयश्च सन्ध्ययोः रक्षां कुर्युः. Another is the Raksha Vidhana. Raksha Vidhana we have already discussed in the previous chapter, and that Raksha Vidhana, the prevention of the sepsis by having a sort of religious perception, also is to be practiced. We have discussed somewhat in detail about the Raksha Vidhana earlier. Sarshapa Arishtapatrabhyam Sarpisha Ravanenva Dilana Karaya Dhupam Dasharatram Atanditaha. Another of the option is the fumigation of the wound as well as fumigation of the room. Now, Sarshapa, Arishtapatra, etc., these are used for fumigation. Now, whether they have to be used for the fumigation of the wound or fumigation of the room, this is the question. I would say it's the fumigation of the room so that the environment is kept free, not the fumigation of the wound directly, possibly. But of course, this is an issue of controversy because there are some practices and there are some even thesis articles presented where the wound is exposed to the fumigation and the studies are done. So I will not go into that controversy, but my view is that dhupana is about dhupana of the room, not of the wound. Chatra, ati chatra, Langanim, Jatilam, Brahmacharinim, Lakshmim, Guham, Atiguham, Vatam, Ativisham, Shataviryam, Sahasraviryam, Siddharthagam, Shirasadharayat. Some of these herbs which would have the prabhava and they can be kept in contact with the body so that the possibility of sepsis would be reduced. Vedyeta balavedanihi, Vranam nacha vighattayat, natudeta, nakandayat, Shayanaha, Paribalayat, Anena videna yuktam adaveva nishataraha, Vanam kesharnakrantam hodeyanti mrudaha iva. Now, you need to have a proper ventilation. Proper ventilation can be kept by a fan, Vedyeta, Balavejanihi, and at the same time, the wound should not have a friction, should not itch the area, scratch the area around, and so that the wound is protected. If you follow these, then the nishatara, the infection doesn't occur, and organisms will run away from a person who is having this kind of an environment, like the deers running away from away from the lions as such in a forest. Now, the infection complicated the wound healing is one of the very popular issue, and it's a very well-known issue. I think that it doesn't require much of the explanation, but I would like to highlight certain of the misgivings about the infection. Simply presence of the bacteria in a wound doesn't mean infection. So if you do a culture test and then if the bacterial count is not more than 10 to the power of 5 bacteria per gram tissue, then only it can be considered as infection. Otherwise, every wound would have a contamination. So contamination and infection are two different issues. This is from the microbiology, of course, if at all possible. We had discussed about this issue in earlier previous classes about the microbiology and these infections and so on. So I think that's one. And presence of more than one bacterial strain is also one of the causes for the infection. So when you have only single strain, it may not be really infecting organism, possibly. And the bacteria are capable of altering their phenotypic and genotypic characteristics, and hence use of antibiotics, particularly local use of antibiotics, has a very significant limitation. And because the organisms they tend to have a mutation quite frequently and more frequently when it is over the wound than in the system. And multi-resistant organism is another issue, which is a very hotly debated issue now, and one of the major issues. I think we will not go into detail. I am just highlighting about certain of the controversies related to the infection as it, and biofilms are the scabs-like substances which are precipitated over the wound, which prevent the drugs from reaching to the area, and hence a daily dressing of the wound is more important than use of any antibiotics as such. And recurrent or invasive wound infections are other issues. So even if you treat one infection, there is a possibility of second infection. And this need to be attended to when you treat the infection from the point of view of contemporary science, where the organisms are supposed to be from the exterior. Whereas from Ayurvedic point of view, that paka is due to the vitiation of the doshas as such. So that's the controversy. Again, we will not go into much of the controversy now at this stage. जीर्णशाद्योदनं स्निग्धम् अल्पमुष्णं सहोत्तरं गुप्यानः जाङ्गले हिमांसि शीघ्रं गुणमपोहति तण्डुलीयक जीवन्ति शून्यशृण्णक वास्तुकैः बालमूलकवार्ताकपटोलैः कार्वैलकैः सदाडिवैः आमलकैः घृतपृष्टैः ससैन्धवैः अन्यैः एवं गुणैर्वापि मुक्तादीनां रसेन वा शक्तून् विलेपिं कुर्माशां जलं चापि श्रुतं पिबेत. The diet which is prescribed to a patient during the wound healing is a light diet, a diet which doesn't have much of a metabolic load. That's Girnashali, that the rice or maybe grain which is stored for a year, and it should have Snigdha Guna, Usna Guna, and has more of liquid like Ganji. acid, or jangalam also could be given in a person who is non-vegetarian. Then the tandoori to give a ketchup. These are all the nourishing substances which are added to, and with this you may give either vilaiti, kulmasha, or jala, simply liquid. Different varieties or grades of food, the liquid content and the diet can be given. Other again summarizing, Divana Nitra Vishaka, Nimata Grahagochara, Vrani Vaidivashe Tistan, Shikram Ramapoti, Vrane Shreturayat, such a Ragasta Jagarata, Tautarukya Diva Swapata, Tastum Murtyusta Maitunata. Now, this is repetition of what's told, like during the wound healing, you should maintain that sleep cycle properly. If the sleep cycle is, if you sleep more in the daytime, then it becomes pain, it produces the pain, and the inflammation will be more if you avoid sleep in the night as well. And if you exert, then there could be more of swelling, and sexual indulgence can even lead to fatal complications. This is what Sushil said. It doesn't mean that every patient having a sex would have a fatal complication, but there is a possibility. The complication can be quite severe, and the patient has to follow the instruction of the physician. Then only there could be a proper healing. Evam mrutta samacharah vrani sampadyate sukhi ayush 𝐿𝐿𝐵𝐫 dhanvantari vacho yatha. So if you follow these restrictions, the wound will heal well, and this is a final view of dhanvantari asset. Now, from the present point of view, when you say the wound healing and the phases of the wound healing, the moment the wound occurs, there is the first phase is of the hemostasis and inflammation, which is the stage where the possibility of Shita Chikitsa is to be suggested. Now, in the Sadhyavarana, later we come to that Sadhyavarana, there where Sushil suggested about the Shita Chikitsa, and there is no question of dosha involvement. But later on, once the wound has occurred and the hemostasis has been established, then the next stage is of the inflammation, and during that inflammation, the leukocytes and the other cells would be coming to the area and they produce inflammation of localization. At the same time, there would be the inflammation, bacterial possibility of contamination of the bacterial possibility. And if this is prevented, the next stage will be a repair stage. And during this repair stage, we will have the proliferation of the cells, and the proliferation of the cells results in, and the time taken for are the same stages again, they could be considered into these stages, and the chemicals which are presented at this stage would be of different varieties. And one of the important substances which will have a role to play is the zinc is now considered. We'll come to that part again. Now, the time duration, average time duration for a total healing of the wound is the stage of inflammation to subside. It may take about 10 days, something of that sort. And the cell proliferation and matrix deposition and a scar formation, it may take about 30 days. But a real matrix remodeling, where the real normal cell may be established, it may take about 300 days, up to a year. And that's why Sushil says in the wound healing, like you need to take care of the wound even for a duration of a year, so that it's not only the scar formations. Now, from all our point of view, when we have a wound covered with a relative dry granulation tissue, we say that the wound is healed. But the real healing, where the normal cell may be established and all the cellularity and vascularity will be re-established, it may take about a year. Some 300 days means something around a year, and that's the real duration during which you need to take care of. In a normal healing would occur usually, as a primary healing would occur in 7 days. Secondary healing is about 3 weeks, as such, if there are no complications. But it may become more chronic. It may not occur because of, but if the cell division is not proper, low metatic activity, which occurs in patients who have diseases, systemic diseases, or old age, where the metatic activity will be lesser. And if the migration of the keratinocytes are affected, this is due to the friction. If the wound is not properly dressed, or too much of rigorous dressing also can produce this delayed healing or can occur. Fibroblast cellular phenotype being altered, which is due to a improper blood supply, that fibroblast proliferation and migration would be affected. So this is one of the causes for a delay in the wound healing. which usually occurs in case of the varicose ulcers as such. Then decreased response to fibroblasts to growth factors. Growth factors is another of the issue which facilitate the cells to grow, and if this doesn't occur, which again occurs in case of systemic disorders like diabetes, presence of increased proportion of senescent cells, as in case of the old age, where the cells are not healthy, this also can be a cause for the chronic wound healing becoming more chronic. Now, one of the another very interesting issue is in the present day situation, one of the substance which is now becoming very focus of wound healing is zinc, and lots of articles, lots of research articles are presented in with zinc and wound healing. Zinc with the immunity is also is another of the issue, a hotly debated issue now. And those during the COVID, that zinc supplement was very commonly used as such. That's the issue. So anyway, again, I am not suggesting that the zinc is essential, but because in the wound healing, one of the very hot subject would be now in the present day situation is zinc, and hence I have referred to that issue. And with this, we'll conclude. It is Sushrutamidam Sutasthane Vranitopasaniyadhyayah 𝐬𝐴𝐴. Summary care of the wound is described to the minutest details in Sushrutamita. The principles described in Sushruta are the